right, so thank you for tuning in to Chompin a Bit. I'm Kyle Edwards. So this episode, we're going to take a look at college football. So the main focus of this episode, I will be looking at the college football rankings that came out Tuesday night. Give you my, reaction, thoughts, impressions, whatever. We'll go through that. Now, I also want to take at a story that could become a big issue next coming weeks. Take a look at a couple of teams from those rankings where I'm kind of wondering why the committee views them the way that they do based off of their ranking. Also, we'll take a look at a school that's trying to better their resume by possibly picking up an opponent. And then also, by the end of the episode, we'll go ahead and set you up for the next coming, couple of episodes, let you know where my focus is for the next few days. But get the episode started with, want to give a big shout out to Sarah Fuller. So if you don't know who Sarah Fuller is, over the weekend she became the first woman to play in a Power 5 conference college football game. And for those of you who may not know what Power 5 conference means, that just means that she played for a college football team in the ACC. So that's like your Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, SEC with Georgia, Alabama, schools like that, Big Ten, Ohio State's, Pac-12, Oregon, and then your Big 12, like your Texas, Oklahoma schools. So she did it for Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is in the SEC. She was the kicker for them, as their starting kicker went down in injury last week. They needed a replacement kicker. Someone on the team staff saw her on the women's college team. She was their goalkeeper. She showed that she had a strong leg. They approached her. She was like, sure, why not? And she got in. I believe she had the kickoff in the second half. So there you are. Sarah Fuller made history over the weekend. Shout outs to her. Of course, whenever there's a story like that, I was on Twitter and, I noticed some, let's call them trolls. They may feel the way that they did, but of course they were trolling it with under the story, talking about, oh, that's not big news. Because, Vanderbilt did get smoked 43-0, but that's besides the point. But, you get those normal comments of oh, she's the kicker. That's not even a real blah, blah, blah. So, anyway, congratulations to Sarah Fuller. But then, seeing that, I did think real quickly, is a kicker or a punter kind of the only way you would see a woman in college football? We're not going to look at NFL yet, because I think for a woman to play in the NFL, of course you'd have to see probably more coincidences of women playing college football before you see it in the NFL. But because remember, it was earlier this football season, Carly Lloyd from the U.S. women's team had a tryout with the Philadelphia Eagles. She was trying to say that she could handle kicking duties, and she put together a little workout where I believe she kicked I want to say she kicked a 50-yarder or so, and she made it. So she was showing that she could do the job. Nothing really came of that, but I could see a women kicker in the NFL at some point. But is that kind of where the opportunity would end for a woman? Would we see a woman wide receiver or something? I don't know, but hey, baby steps, I guess. So Sarah Fuller becoming a kicker at Vanderbilt, hey, that's fine. I am interested to see if she will, take the kicking duties, for the rest of the season, Will she get a chance to kick a field goal? Anything like that? We'll have to see. And will this maybe start a trend where, every year maybe a school pops up with a woman kicker? I don't know, but shout out to Sarah Fuller for becoming the first one, at least in a major conference game. So, also, this kind of it's kind of starting off on a high note. Now for kind of some bad news. The pandemic is kind of running wild throughout college football. We're continuing to see a lot of games being postponed or canceled. Postponed ones, I'm not sure whether they're going to get rescheduled or not, because now we're kind of deep into the college football calendar. I think college football wants to wrap up a lot of these regular season, conference games and all that by like December 19th. That way they can get ready for the bowl season. But with the bowl season, there's now the list of bowl games that have now been canceled due to the pandemic is now up to 10. So that's going to be opportunities for some schools to kind of play, an extra game, seniors to get an extra game. That's been taken away. And of those 10 bowl games, I think 4 of them had Pac-12 ties. Pac-12 is being affected by that. But the Pac-12, out of the big conferences, might play the least number of games. So it's a crazy, topsy-turvy 2020 season, which is why when college football was getting started, I did say that the NCAA should have done the right thing, expand the playoff, make it, you can make the exception for this year and then go back to the 4 teams for next year or whatever. But, give the 8-team playoff a try and see what that looks like. So NCAA kind of missed an opportunity on that, but we all know that the NCAA kind of does whatever they want. Usually it's the wrong thing, but hey, they're going to continue being them. So with the cancellations, now we're coming into some issues where before a lot of these conferences got started, conferences set aside rules for canceling games, postponements and all that, giving guidelines on how many games teams would have to play to qualify for conference titles and all that kind of stuff. So where we're starting to see here now is with more games being canceled and postponed, some big name schools may not be able to qualify for their conference titles. We saw that with Wisconsin already. Although I don't think Wisconsin was really going to represent on the Big Ten. I keep wanting to say East and West, but I think it's North and South. But whichever side of the Big Ten they're in, Wisconsin has missed a few games now, so they can't represent their half of the Big Ten. And with the cancellations going on as well, there's now a big name school that has college football playoff aspirations that may fall into the same trap as Wisconsin, and that school is Ohio State, because Ohio State has had 2 games canceled so far, and they could possibly have a third one coming down the line, which I'll get into in a little bit here. But I mean, if you're going to have these big name schools not play in the conference title games, how's that going to look for the NCAA? So let's say we'll take the Big Ten because it seems like they're the ones being affected the most. But, most Big Ten fans and college football fans want to see like an Ohio State, Wisconsin Big Ten title game. What if you end up, because of cancellations, you end up with like Minnesota, Michigan State? I mean, that's not going to be the matchup, but I'm just saying. Like, it kind of feels like, yes, it's been a shortened year, but it kind of feels like it's even cheapened even more, because now you're not even getting what you want in the end. So we'll definitely have to take a look at that because, like I said, we're coming on to the last few weeks. So if you hear games being canceled and postponed, you might just run out of time before you can reschedule them. And now that's going to kind of make it so, I don't know, maybe the playoff, depending who they end up, putting in there at the end, could it cheapen the playoff a little bit? We'll have to see. But once again, I really think they should have went to 8 teams this year, but they didn't, so we'll just move on. And taking a look at the college football rankings from Tuesday night, and as I explained, I believe it was last week when they released their first playoff standing, they get a committee in a room. Well, I'm guessing these times they do a Zoom call or whatever, but you get like a representative from each of the major conferences and then a few other people sprinkled in there. They sit down, they give their top, they rank their 25, and that's how we come up with the college football playoff ranking. And then from that 25, we focus on the top 6 because those 6 teams end up in your New Year's 6 bowls where the top 4 are in the playoff. So that's where you go at our semifinal matchups. And then your other 2 from the outside are kind of seen as your honorable mention teams who play in another big bowl on New Year's Day. So with their second ranking, they have Alabama at 1. No argument there. Alabama's undefeated. They're 8-0. They just came off of blowing out Auburn in the Iron Bowl last week. Their final games against LSU. They take care of business against LSU. They'll go into the SEC title game against, it looks like it's going to be Florida at this point. So Alabama's pretty much locked in. The only way I could see Alabama really falling out at this point, they'd probably have to lose to LSU, go into the SEC title game, and kind of get blown out by Florida. That's the only way I could see Alabama falling out at this point. But for the most part, they are pretty much locked in. Notre Dame is at number 2. Notre Dame is 9-0. They just came off of beating 17th ranked North Carolina, beat them by 2 touchdowns, so comfortable win. They have their final game coming up against Syracuse, game that they should win. So they will head into the ACC title game. Remember, Notre Dame has a special provision this year where football-wise, they usually play ACC teams for most of their schedule. But for this year, they are actually a part of the ACC and can represent the ACC in the ACC title game. And with the ACC, they usually have 2 divisions, but this year they're just doing it as 1. So the top 2 teams are going to face off in the title game, and that's basically looking like it's going to be Notre Dame and Clemson in a rematch of the game from a few weeks ago, where Notre Dame knocked off Clemson, gave them their only loss when Trevor Lawrence was out with testing positive for COVID-19. So Notre Dame kind of looks like they're a lock. Once again, their only way that they fall out, they'd have to probably lose to Syracuse, and then in the rematch against Clemson, ACC title game, Clemson would have to probably, blow the doors off of them by 3 touchdowns. Because otherwise, if they, beat Syracuse and even lose to Clemson in a close game, since Clemson is in the top 4 right now, they'd probably keep Notre Dame in the top 4 as well. They would just shuffle the numbers around a little bit. So Clemson's at number 3. They're 8-1. They are coming off a blowout of Pittsburgh. And their final game, question mark, is against Virginia Tech. Because remember the Florida State game where Dabo and Florida State's coach, can't remember his name right now, but they kind of went at it where Dabo was saying that Florida State used a positive test on Clemson as a reason to cancel the game, even though they wanted to play it. Florida State's like, no, we're just making sure our players are safe, blah, blah, blah. So would they reschedule that game? after the Virginia Tech game because Clemson will get a week off after Virginia Tech before the ACC title game. So there is a window there to reschedule the game. But I think at this point, Clemson would reschedule it if they needed the game. But if they beat Virginia Tech, they're going to be 9-1. They'll be safe in the top 4. And for them, once again, only way they would fall out, Notre Dame would have to, give them their second loss on the year and beat them in pretty, handily beat them. Probably by 10, well, not 10, but 14, 17, 20 points, something like that. So Clemson, you could probably look at. They could be locked in after beating Virginia Tech no matter what happens in the ACC title game. But now we get down to the 4th spot, where right now Ohio State is hanging on. They're 4-0. I think for the Big Ten, they have to play at least 6 games in order to play in the Big Ten title game. So right now they've played 4. They've had a couple canceled. So they have 2 games left against Michigan State and Michigan. So Ohio State has to make sure that those 2 games get played. Otherwise, no Big Ten title, most likely no playoffs for them. And we'll touch on that a little later because I do want to get more into that Ohio State schedule a little bit later. But even if they get those 2 games in, unless they go 6-0, is the committee going to look at that and really think that they played enough this year to warrant a top 4 spot, especially with them being 4? And then looking behind them, you have Texas A&M at 5, who is 6-1. They've knocked off Florida. Good win. Their only loss is to Alabama, who's number 1. So you can't really hold that against them. Their final 2 games, they have Auburn and Tennessee. Tennessee is a rescheduled game from earlier in the year. So there's a good chance A&M goes 8-1. And would you have an 8-1 SEC team like Texas A&M? Would you keep them out for a 6-0 Ohio State team? That's going to be an interesting question for the committee. For A&M, you beat Auburn. I believe Auburn is still ranked even after losing to Alabama. But if they are, they're probably ranked 24th, 25th. So still a ranked opponent. And it's late in the year. It's always good. Tennessee, that probably won't move the needle as much, but getting to 8-1 would be a big deal for A&M. And then even beyond that, you have Florida sitting at 6. Florida 7-1. They beat Georgia. Their loss is to A&M. So, Florida is right there, ready to jump into 4 if A&M were to slip up in their final 2 games. Florida has Tennessee and LSU. LSU is a rescheduled game because, as you see, A&M and Florida made sure that one of their postponed games from before, they put it back on the schedule at the end here to try to give them an extra game to possibly jump into 4 if Ohio State maybe has a game canceled or something, or if the committee looks at 6-0 is not enough. Well, Florida's going to try to make a case to jump over A&M, even if A&M wins out. So just hearing those 6 teams, and then outside of that 6, so that's your New Year's 6 as of right now. At 7 is Cincinnati, the team that I've been talking about all year. And it seems like they're kind of stuck at 7 at this point. And the only way they may move up, is if, Ohio State drops one of the Michigan games, Michigan and Michigan State. Then Cincinnati might get into a New Year's 6. But we'll just focus on those 6 teams right now. So coming back to Ohio State. Michigan had a game this weekend against Maryland. Michigan's canceled the game, and they're pausing football activities because of positive tests in Michigan. So that news affects Ohio State. As I said, Michigan is supposed to play Ohio State. Luckily, that game is for the 12th of December. So by then, you figure Michigan should have resumed football activities. So that game should happen. Once again, should happen. But we don't know. And if that's the case and Ohio State ends up 5-0, like I said, they have to play at least 6 games to get to the Big Ten title. So they would lose out on that extra game. Then at that point, you're stuck with a 5-0 Ohio State team. And I don't know if the committee would still have them at 4, but we'll just play the game here. So let's say they're still 5-0. I do not think a 5-0 team should get in over 8-1 or a 9-1 school like A&M and Florida could be. So Ohio State may just be holding that spot right now, because even with the committee, somebody interviewed one of the committee members and they said there was a strong case in the room to put A&M up at number 4 over Ohio State, but they figured I guess Ohio State being undefeated and just watching them on TV, they definitely look like a top team. So by the slightest of margins, they left Ohio State at 4. So there's already talk within the committee room about knocking Ohio State out of the playoff anyway. So that's definitely another story to look forward to. So best case is Michigan resumes football activities. Ohio State takes care of business against Michigan State this weekend, and then gets Michigan next weekend, gets to 6-0, and then gets their big title game against, I don't know, whoever it is, Indiana or Iowa. No, not Iowa State. I think Iowa State's Big 12, but they get some good game in the Big 10 title game. They can then get up to 7-0. 7-0 would look a lot better than 6-0 to me. So that's best case for Ohio State. And if Ohio State does that, they will stay within the top 4. But question is, are we headed towards A&M and Florida jumping up into spot number 4, and then the playoff literally just turning into ACC versus SEC with like Alabama and A&M, and then Notre Dame and Clemson representing the ACC? I think if that happens, that's going to be the worst case scenario for college football, because if all that this season boils down to is out of 5 power conferences, which are supposed to dominate the rankings, only 2 of them get represented in the 4-team playoff. I mean, that's going to cause a lot of eyebrows being raised within, Big Ten. Like I said, my perfect scenario, Ohio State sits there undefeated and then they get left out. The Big Ten's going to be upset. The Big 12's already probably going to be upset because their teams aren't really represented that well in the ranking. But, Big 12 has had their issues this year, so they can't really complain about too much. But I could see where they would raise some questions. The Pac-12 never gets any respect in the college football playoffs, so I guess they could be mad about it, but not really much they can do, because they are the ones who chose to start their schedule so late, and are going to end up playing probably the least amount of games out of your Power 5 conferences. So there's not really much of an argument there, but yeah, that's the last thing you want to see. 4-team playoff, only 2 conferences represented. It's not going to be fun. I mean, the games will be great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, think of it as, let's say Florida finds their way up there. You could have, in the playoffs, you could have like Alabama, Florida for the 3rd time. You could get Notre Dame, Clemson for the 3rd time. Some fans probably do not want to see that at all, but it's a possibility with the way that these rankings are looking. So yeah, the NCAA may shoot themselves in the foot, but hey, their job is to get 4 best teams, and ACC and the SEC were kind of the first 2 conferences to get their schedules going, so they're going to end up playing the most games. Maybe it's fitting for those 2 conferences to battle it out for the title. I don't know. We'll see. If it does happen, we'll have to see what the TV ratings and all that look like. I'm sure there'll be highly rated games because they're all big name schools. Fans would probably want Florida in there over A&M. I think Florida probably carries more of a fan base than A&M does, but cross that bridge when we get there. But looking at the rankings, kind of outside of the top 6, there were 2 teams that just have me scratching my head a little bit. First one, Georgia. I do not understand why the committee is so high on Georgia. I don't know what it is. They have Georgia ranked number 8. I don't get it. Don't see why that is. So you mean to tell me so they're 6-2 right now. They have, I want to say, 1 game left. So they could end their year 7-2. Fine. But just looking at their schedule, so they won against Auburn and Tennessee early on when Auburn and Tennessee were ranked. But as the season has played out, those games don't look as impressive anymore. 1, Tennessee is no longer ranked, and it's kind of a middle-of-the-road team. Auburn, at the time when Georgia played them, was ranked like 7th. As we see, that was, gross over estimate of the team, because now they're barely hanging on to a top 25 spot. And the only 2 really tough games on their schedule, Alabama and Florida, they got boat raced in. Remember the Alabama game, they had the lead going into halftime, and then Alabama turned on the Jets, shifted into another gear. Georgia did nothing, ended up losing by 2 touchdowns. Florida had their way with Georgia. Kyle Trask basically jumped into the Heisman talk after that game. Kyle Pitts had a decent game to start off and then took that cheap hit from a Georgia player, but they lost that game by like 2 touchdowns. So based off of that, I don't see why they're ranked so high. Yeah, they won. They beat Kentucky after that, like 14-3. Not really an impressive showing. And then they finally made the switch at quarterback to JT Daniels. I don't know, maybe that's what the committee's looking at, is they're kind of rating them a little higher because they like JT Daniels leading that team. If that's what it is, I guess fine. But depending on what happens with Cincinnati at 7 and the 6 we talked about, I don't need to see Georgia in a New Year's 6 bowl, because I already know it's going to happen. They'll probably end up playing some, other really good team. And based off of what their schedules look like, they're probably going to end up losing that game. And I don't need to see that. So I do think Georgia should be a little bit lower. Like if you had Georgia at 10, I'd be fine with it. I just think 8 is too close to a New Year's 6 bowl. And I don't think Georgia deserves that after 2 blowout losses to 2 highly ranked SEC teams, and then getting 6-7 wins against middle of the road SEC or just bottom barrel SEC teams. No, that doesn't seem right to me. So whatever. The committee likes them more than I do, apparently, and for me, my sake, hopefully they don't get into the New Year's 6. Another one, poor BYU just can't get can't make any traction with the committee because they are ranked 13th. They're 9-0, and in the 2020 season, you can't really blame BYU for their schedule because they weren't really able to schedule bigger name schools because restrictions on travel and all that kind of stuff. So they kind of play the schedule that they have, but BYU is trying to do something about that because as of right now, they're 9-0, and their final game was going to be against San Diego State. I think that's on the 12th, but BYU hasn't played since the end of November around Thanksgiving. So by the time the San Diego State game comes, they would have been off for like 2.5 weeks. And, if they have any, aspirations of making a playoff, they could probably forget about that. But I'm sure BYU feels like they should be in a New Year's Six Bowl, sitting at 9-0. But like I said, I think their biggest win on their schedule is probably maybe Boise State. And Boise State's like 22nd ranked in the country. So what they're trying to do is Coastal Carolina was supposed to play Liberty, but Liberty is having some issues with the pandemic, and that game may get canceled. So BYU has been in contact with Coastal Carolina, saying that if Liberty does back out of the game, then BYU is willing to take the spot for Liberty, travel to Coastal Carolina, and play in that game. Coastal Carolina is ranked like 15th, also undefeated. And I think that's a big deal for BYU because that will be a good win if they were to win that game. A good win for their resume. Maybe bump them up a few spots. And if they don't get into New Year's Six, at least they can get into a better bowl game. So I am glad that BYU is doing something. They were kind of in the same situation they were in a few weeks ago where they had an open date, fought to get a game, but the only game they could get was like some directional school like northeastern Illinois or something, which didn't really move the needle. At least Coastal Carolina would definitely do a little something for them. So good for BYU for trying to do something, as I'm sure they're feeling disrespected. But like I said, you understand because BYU's schedule's been kind of one of the weakest among top ranked teams. But like I said, not all their fault. And even with a school like BYU, your hope is to rank high enough at the end of this year that maybe in the preseason rankings for next year, maybe they're a team that's within the top 10. And if they can continue their success from this year into next year, maybe that top 10 start in the early season leads to a top 6 finish by the end of the year. So, like I said, a lot of these teams right now are also positioning for preseason rankings for next year. So, hopefully it works out for BYU. I mean, it would be bad if Liberty had to cancel, but I wouldn't mind watching BYU face Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina is another good story that's come out of this year. They may finish their year undefeated, be a top 15 or top 12 team in the country. For a school like Coastal Carolina, that's a big deal. Might help in some recruiting, all that kind of stuff. So there are some outside factors that are playing into the last few weeks of this year. But like I said, college football is winding down. Then we'll get into bowl season. Hopefully no more bowl games get canceled, but if they do, we'll see what that does for the bowl schedule. But yeah, it's been an interesting college football year. Coming down to the end, now's the time where pressure's going to be put on some of these top teams to try to keep their standing. And of course, pressure goes up by a million once the playoff games come around. And with all that, hopefully we can get a champion out of this season. Hey, it might be champion on, I don't know, like a paper thin resume. That's probably not going to happen. I'm just kidding, because at least the top 3 teams, you wouldn't be mad if either one of them won the title. I mean, if Ohio State was still in there and they won it, maybe some people might be a little whatever. But either way, as long as we get a champion this year, that's definitely a win for college football. So yeah. So thanks for tuning into that. That's kind of where we'll stop with college football. We'll come back again next week with college football to see, I guess, what those college football rankings look like. Is Ohio State going to still be in the top 4? We'll definitely have to see what happens over the weekend with their game. And can Cincinnati get into a New Year's Six bowl? And what happens with BYU if they can play Coastal Carolina? So some storylines to watch for next week. But coming up for other episodes this week. So tomorrow, Thursday, we're going to talk NFL. Get you started for week 13 in the NFL. And then week 12 just ended. It's Wednesday afternoon in that 3:40 window game. I don't know how many of you watched it. I did. The Steelers-Ravens. So we'll look back at week 12 real quick. Go over my picks. This week I did have the extra game because of Baltimore and Pittsburgh playing on Wednesday. So I had 7 picks this week. Go over that. Major storyline coming out of week 12, and then we'll shift right into week 13 preview. Looking at the Thursday night game and other stuff. I am going to touch on NBA stuff this week. Probably Friday, Saturday. As there's been some big news that's happened past couple of days. We have a big contract extension for a star in the league. Go over that. A trade that kind of came out of nowhere. Definitely going to touch on that. And I'll also touch on winners, losers coming out of free agency. With what preseason's going to start here in like a week and a half. So get you back in the flow for NBA, because definitely have a lot of content on that once the season gets kicked off. So, but yeah, definitely a lot to look forward to, and hopefully you will tune in, check it out with me. So thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed what you heard. As I always say, go to the Facebook page, Chompin at the Bit. Give the show a follow there. You can follow me on Twitter at Chompin Podcast. I put polls up there periodically. Starting to get more active on Twitter, so definitely follow the show there. Subscribe wherever you are listening to the podcast, whatever platform you're on. Definitely do that. If there is a spot to leave a review of the show, you can do that there as well. But yeah, drop a comment on Twitter or something. I'm definitely open to that and want to be interactive with you guys. But anyway, be safe out there. God bless, and I'll catch you in the next episode. All right.